So what we're doing right now is giving the high build primer that we apply to these bumpers the final sanding process, which I like to do wet, and I'm using 2000 grit Abralon disc. It's designed to go on a DA sander, which you can do, but I've grown fond of doing it by hand. And what that's doing is, it's just taking out, so the initial sanding was done on the primer with 500 grit. And you can leave it in 500 grit if you want. Base coat will cover it, but I don't like to take that risk. So I'll go over it again after 500 with something a bit finer, 2000, just to take out the marks that the 500's put in. Also, these, with them being sponge or foam or whatever, they're much more flexible. So for getting into the little nooks and crannies, it's a lot easier. Do you know what I mean? So I'm now, for example, where I might not have gone as hard with 500 in some of these nooks and crannies, I'm now going to use the soft foam because it molds to the shape a lot easier. And I know that inside all the little bits and bats, it's got a good key as well, because if you don't key it, paint don't stick, falls off, you jet wash it, you blast the paint off, and you look like a fucking knobhead. Which obviously no painter in the world wants. After this, like I say, we'll go around all the nooks and crannies, around all the edges, flat surfaces, clean it off, into the booth, and paint them. But I think we'll be putting some what's called wet on wet primer on these, which is a final coat of primer before you apply your base coat, which again just fills any imperfections, makes it nice and even, and in little areas, like say for example on this corner where I've rubbed through the primer back down to plastic, really before you paint that, you should be applying more primer, and rather than just doing a little with some aerosol, it'll get a full coat of what's called surface primer, or wet on wet, which is a non-sanding primer. Don't sand it, you apply it, let it flash off for 5 minutes, and then you put your base and your lacquer on. So yeah, that's basically it. Scratch removal and final key in all the little bits and bobs. Wash it off, degrease it, fucking paint it. Yeah. Thank you. Within this process, what we're doing also is we're taking note of any imperfections or anything that the high build primer didn't cover. So for example, on this, we'll see some pinholing, which is actually in the resin from the mold that the high build primer hasn't filled. So no panic. What we'll do in this case is we'll use this, which is, it's like body filler, but it's a single pack, which means it's just one part, not two parts, like conventional body filler. And it's usually used just for small pinholes and little things like this prior to paint. It's fast drying and it does its job super well. So you'll see, have you seen the pinholes? Really fine hole that paint probably wouldn't cover. So then we just take a little bit of this on a filler card and wipe it in a couple of different directions. Nice and smooth. Take off the excess because there's no need to have loads on there, just want to fill the hole. And now if you take a look, you'll see it's filled them all. So when it comes to give that 10-15 minutes to flash off, nib it off with 2000 and it'll be ready to paint and you'll have no pinholes. So here we are at the paint mixing bench. Now, when I was in college, many moons ago, we did some work with a big paint company called House of Colour, and they do all kinds of like crazy marbleizers, candies, chameleons, all the custom stuff. If you ever watch like old episodes of Pimp My Ride or whatever, when they're doing crazy paint jobs, it's House of Colour. And we did this course with them, and we had this like main guy come out and show us how to use the products. And one of the things that I took away from him, and I still remember to this day, I don't know if he'll ever see this video, but if he does, I remembered. And he always told us that this is where 80% of painters fuck up at the mixing bench, whether something's not been stirred properly, too much of something, too little of something, can cause massive issues. So I spend a good amount of time, like I can feel the sediment in the middle of this tin, thick sediment that hasn't been mixed. You've just got to spend the time and mix, which is great for me because I get to chill out for a bit. High production non-sanding primer. Non-sanding is important. It's black in colour because we are painting gloss black, so it makes sense just to have something less effort to cover. Basically all this does is provides a coat and fills in any imperfections from sanding, so you're not just putting base coat straight over a sanded surface, you're getting that extra bit of coverage, and that's all this is. First time I've used this one. They usually come in what's classed as 1K, which means they don't have hardener in, but this is mixed with a hardener at a ratio of 3:1, which means 3 parts product, 1 part hardener. Okay, so we're happy with that. Bush! Now, this is a mixing stick. It's got the ratios on it, predefined. So you can see this is 3:1 and it's marked out. So I would go to, depending on how much I wanted, I'd go to the 5 with the product, 5 with the hardener, and then you've got this little scale here which shows you how much thinners to put in. That's really personal preference. They advise that you put at least 10% in, but it's up to you, or however you use your gun, you set up whatever, blah, blah, blah. So now, also, most mixing cups these days, especially these posh plastic ones, also have the ratios written on them, so you don't really need to use a stick. This is 3:1 or 5:1 if you're using their hardener. We don't have their hardener, we just have a medium solid multi-mix, which is medium solid. So here we go, technique 3:1. We're gonna have a full cup because we've got 2 bumpers to do. So we'll go to the first 3. Bop. Look at that technique. So we've gone to 3 with product, hardener. It's not the hardener that's been paired with this product, it's a different one. It's for high build primer, but any hardener will work. You can mix them, you know, you don't have to be that anal. Here we go now, up to the 1, so 3:1. Bosh. And now thinners. So I like it to flow pretty nicely. This is the first time I'll be putting surfacer primer on with this primer gun as well, so it'll be interesting to see what happens with this. I have noticed that it does tend to kind of chuck it on, so I'll make sure to turn the fluid down on it so not as much product comes out. Thinners, I like to do 20 to 30%. I'm a liberal guy, so I'll go at 20% with that. And now, once again, we stir it thoroughly. You can literally feel it on the stick after enough practice, whether or not something's mixed properly or not, because you'll feel the extra weight, sort of the resistance at the bottom of the cup. Also, you'll notice as well that on top, it'll stay thin for a while until it's fully mixed, because the thinners is just sitting on top of the product and the hardener. But yeah, don't be shy of spending a bit of time mixing, because if you cock up here, you don't mix it enough. Big trouble later in spray booth, and you gonna know. Sorry about that. What's rattling around in here? I had my Weetabix that day, didn't I? Fuck, you know. That's the air cap. I keep the air caps submerged in a little bit of thinners to keep them clear. So when I come back to use it, it's not blocked up. Make sure it's on straight. Bosh. Excess thinners, wipe off. Bosh. Can never stir too much. Can never stir too much shit around the workshop either. That's my other profession. Isn't it, Liam? All right, cool. And then one thing I always do as well, strainer. Different meshes, different microns that they'll let different amounts through. And that just stops any dirt ingress that you might have picked up from the cut during the mixing process. Stop it from going into the gun. And then onto your job. Bada bing, bada boom. Happy days. Lid on. That's ready to rumble. And now head into the booth. So that primer that we've just mixed, you'll notice these bumpers, so they've had 3 coats, they've been prepped, and then plastic primed, and then 3 coats of high build primer, and then sanded. Now, the problem with that is, if you look here, is that sometimes you will rub through that primer during the prep process, which will expose the bare plastic. Now, really, you're supposed to have that covered before you apply your base coat. So that's another job that this primer is doing. It's covering all the rub-throughs, any indentations and deep scratches and stuff from your prep, and just giving you a lovely, nice, even surface ready to apply your top coats. But the first thing we're going to do is panel wipe it. You'll notice I've got gloves on as well, and that's to stop me getting my greasy hands on there and leaving greasy fingerprints. And then we use this solvent panel wipe. You'll watch of people use different things. There's no real right way and a wrong way to do things. You know, if you get results with your way, then fair play. I know some people use things like brake cleaner and just anything that's sort of alcohol or solvent based cleaners. But we just buy panel wipe because that's what it's for. And you see, boom, we're going to wipe it on. And then I don't let it dry on. I try and wipe it off. And it does evaporate anyway, so you know, if you do, you know, if you get excess that runs down into gaps and stuff, you don't worry about blowing it out onto your job afterwards because it'll just evaporate. There's another issue that we'll come across now, especially with plastics, and that is static charge. So now, in this process of me rubbing this bumper, I'm creating a static, electronic static charge onto it. So what it's doing now is attracting dust and debris, which might be in the atmosphere, which, let's face it, even in a 50 grand downdraft spray booth, you still get bits of crap. You know, it's very difficult to keep clean. But we have a solution for that now, which I'll show you very shortly, as soon as I finish doing this. I can feel the static on my arm now. You'll see it, if you can see my arm hair. Oh, it's pulling towards the bumper now. Bosh, panel wiped. Now, not everyone does this process because it's messy. Some people think it's unnecessary, but I always do it out of habit, and it does help. I've noticed it helps, but I wet the floor. And then I'll just spread this around, and it just stops any dirt from lifting up off the floor while I'm painting. Right, next step. A start gun. So as we discussed, from that process of rubbing these bumpers, we've now put a static charge into it. So what we're aiming, the whole reason we're doing this is to stop dirt ingress in the clear coat to save time wet sanding and polishing after the fact. So this stack gun, pretty clever. It changes the molecules and stuff in the air, science mode. It changes all the molecules in the air, in the structure of the molecules, and takes the static charge out of the bumper. And it's also got this laser pointer on it as well, which is pretty cool. So you can see where you're actually anti-statting. I like to pretend it's a gun because I'm sad. Right. Yes, it's air operated. Boom. So I'm taking that static charge out now. This is a tack rag, and it's actually sticky, and what it does is remove any dirt and debris that's landed on it. But I've started using the stack gun before the tack rag, so when I tack it, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to put more static charge into it, so I should have done that first. Right, and with that, we are ready to apply.
Makes me prettier, I know that.